welcome to the Clifton Whirly Show. This week we have the Whirlybirds, Josh and Nick. And Nick, you've got a friend that is a special guest this week. I want you to go ahead and introduce him for us, if you will.
Sure. This week we're talking to pickup maker Nic Bongers, and I met him. He's actually a fellow Michigan guy, well, Wisconsin and Michigan, but I met him through 60 Cycle Hum. And at the time, I was looking for some pickups for my my Strat copy, my Hondo Fame, and I'll talk about that in the Mojo Minute. But Nick had put a post on 60 Cycle Hum, I think it was, that was, would you, if you were looking for pickups, would you rather have an aftermarket pickup or a pickup wound by basically a hobbyist that was doing it in their basement for very little profit? And I had posted something on there. And then Nick messaged me and we started talking, and I basically found out that not only was Nick local, but he had a company called Great Lakes Guitar Pickups, and he wound killer pickups, PAFs and Strat pickups and whatnot. And I ended up buying a set from him and putting it in my Hondo. And I really enjoyed the back and forth that Nick and I had, and we've been chatting ever since, and he's just a wealth of knowledge and really likes what he does. And I figured I had to have him on the show. I just thought it would be a really interesting conversation to actually to talk to a pickup builder. So that being said, Nick, why don't you introduce yourself and talk to us a little bit about Great Lakes Guitar Pickups, like how you got started.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really great to be here and talking about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been winding pickups now since 2010, I think. So it's been, I think in July it'll be 8 years. Time flies when you're having fun. I grew up in the 90s. I had older brothers than me, so I grew up on Kiss and Van Halen and stuff. And one thing I always knew about my guitar heroes is that they were always do-it-yourselfers. Eddie Van Halen's got the Franken Strat. Ace Frehley was, routing an extra guitar hole in his Les Paul to a three pickup Les Paul. Or Brian May from Queen made his own guitar, so I almost became as big of a fan of what they did as to the music they made. So whenever I bought guitars like in the 90s, I would find 70s Gibsons for really, really cheap. And I'm like, oh, well, Metallica had EMG pickups. I'm going to throw EMGs in my Explorer and play like James Hetfield. Or Zakk Wylde had EMG pickups, and like I know that like Larry DiMarzio used to wind pickups in a hotel room for Ace Frehley and Kiss. So there came to be like this big stigma around pickups. So you go to, everybody's done this, right? You want to beef up your guitar. So you buy these pickups and you don't find the right pair and you end up chasing the dragon, right? You're trying to find that magic tone. The stereotype in the 90s was if you wanted to sound like yourself, you'd get a Pearly Gates in your bridge and in a jazz Seymour Duncan in the neck. And what happens when everybody has that same, like, do you really sound like yourself? So I kind of got sick of this, constant chasing your tail of trying to make your guitar better with pickups and saying, what really is a pickup? It's a magnet with a bunch of copper wire wrapped around it. It's a basic inductor. And I know pretty much nothing about electronics, but I know plenty about guitars. So since I love research, I work at a university full time. I'm a master in graphic design, so I know a bit about what goes into stuff. And I also know musicians are broke. Musicians aren't very, they're not a very wealthy group. So, spending $300 on a set of expensive brand pickups, is out of most people's price range, right? So I'm like, all right, how much does it cost for a winder? How much does it cost for some of these parts? What does it cost to get started? And I just wanted to just make pickups for myself because I wanted the trial and error of it. I wanted to see what different magnets would do just in my own guitars. Once I'd been doing this for a couple of years, I started winding for friends who are in bands, for family members who are into guitars. If I go to a local show in Detroit, I'd be like, hey man, you got stock pickups in there? Because I can wind you some stuff really cheap. And it kind of grew from there. And like you said, Nick, it's not about profit for me. This is just kind of a hobby. And if I can turn people on, then that's, the whole point of pickups. As long as you can hear that tone in your ears, it shouldn't matter where it comes from or how much you paid for it. Big Rapids up in Michigan has a school called the Gallup School of Guitar Luthery. And that's where, the who's who of luthiers will go to get, certified. in being a guitar luthier. You know, they pretty much chop down a tree and make a multi-$1,000 acoustic guitar. But what I found was that they have a day program. So after for pickup winding. So I signed up, paid the money, and I had already been winding pickups for a few years. But you go there, you spend the whole day, you get a certificate and stuff. So I kind of have a quote-unquote professional backing in winding pickups. And living in Michigan, I kind of thought I was the only one doing this, because a lot of luthiers won't touch pickup repair. They only want to work on guitars. Like, taking apart an old broken pickup isn't profitable for them. So I've been kind of going around to local luthiers around Detroit saying, hey, if somebody comes in with a broken pickup, instead of just suggesting they buy a new one, you can send it to me and I'll repair it for whatever the cost is of the wire and maybe my time. And I'm finding that there's other like boutique pickup companies in Michigan, but when I look up guitar pickups in Michigan on Google, my site comes up over theirs. So I think that that's kind of cool. Mm-hmm. And it's I get emails from people. They saying, yeah, I called the Seymour Duncan Custom Shop and they sent me to you because you're local, and can you fix my lap steel guitar pickup? And I'm like, well, you know, it was like a really old one and stuff. And I'm like, I've never done lap steel, but you know, I know that Jason Lawler does it, you know, and maybe you want to talk to Lawler about it. And there's a really cool kind of underground of all these pickup winders that we get together, and you can talk to these guys. They're normal people. Lindy Fralin, you can talk to him. Wolf Tone Pickups, if you ever heard of Wolf Tone Pickups. Yeah. Like, yeah. I can call Wolf on the phone, and he can be like, yeah, dude, you got to do this, or I can hook you up with this, you know, this vendor for whatever parts. Or Brandon Wound out of Ohio. Even Paul Reed Smith. I met Paul Reed Smith, and he once I told him I wound pickups, he was like, let me ask you something. He's like, how hot do you heat your wax when you pop pickups? And I'm like, I don't know, man. If it's, you know, within the range of 140, 150, it should be all good. And he goes, well, we tried it at every single degree, and we found that 142 degrees is best for wax. He's like, you should try that and let me know what you think. And I'm like, yeah, man, like, I'm just going to call you on the phone. Like, I don't have your number. It's like, you know, thanks for the input. You know, but a lot of people are like really open to what works and what doesn't. And, you know, especially when they find out, you know, I'm a hobbyist, like, I don't want to be the next Larry DiMarzio or Seymour Duncan. I just want to, you know, save people I know some money and have a nice high quality product, and, you know, just, you know, fulfill my own, you know, fire for research and this kind of thing.
Well, that approach is, I'm already fascinated. For one, I didn't know there was an underground ring of pickup builders, so that's awesome. And two, I mean, yeah, that's, you know, I guess that's another plug for the boutique guitar community. You know, everybody's just so down to earth and just wants people to succeed. And I think that's awesome. I did have a question for you about the repair thing. So I just can't imagine having a pickup repaired versus like just having somebody like build me another pickup. Like, I mean, because the components, I mean, do you find that the people that come to you for repairs usually are like vintage people that like want their original PAF or something wound, or an original Telly pickup or something like that? I mean, why would you, I mean, have you ever just like said, no, you know what, it's just a Seymour Duncan, I can wind you a better pickup or something of that nature? Like, where's the line there? Like, what kind of stuff have you worked on?
Yeah, I've done like 59 Gretsch, like the old Filtertrons. And, you know, from a 59 Gretsch, there's a certain amount of mileage that's on that pickup, and to replace it with a new one just wouldn't look right. I've done stuff like that, but ones I've said no to are like that old lap steel that I think, you know, somebody like Lawler could have done a better job. But for the most part, like, I've done 60s Fender pickups, and what's really cool about those is that, like on a Telly bridge, once you get that base plate off, that metal plate off the bottom, it actually has a date in pencil with the name of the person that wound that pickup. I thought that was so cool. Like, it's like a piece of history that you're uncovering that no one else has looked at before. But like you said, these pickups, it's just a bobbin with a bunch of wire and a magnet. So when somebody sends me a repair, I look at it, and the only thing that can really, really break is a wire or a solder joint. So I just tell them that if it's a simple solder joint, it's like $20. But if I have to put new wire on it, it's $40. Because that's, between my time and the amount of wire it takes, that's, and that's astronomically cheaper than anybody else would repair it for. But I match the wire, match the resistance. But if it doesn't look like it should be broken, I take off 100 winds by hand and I retest it. And if it's still dead, I take another 100 winds off. Once you get to the point of like 1,000 winds, it's really not worth saving the original wire. So you just cut off all the old wire, put new wire on it. And if it's a dead pickup, there's tricks. And that's where, Wolf and Brandon, like, that's where they kind of come in. And even some local luthiers, like, I'm like, hey man, this thing doesn't have any resistance. Like, how do I tell how much wire to put back on? Because, like back in the day, the PAFs, they could be, under 7K or they could be over 9K. And somebody wants their PAF repaired. It's like, well, was it a hot one or was it not a hot one? You just don't know. So we've developed ways, and it's really cool, of just, matching it as close as possible, with matching the wire and matching how much was on there.
So you would actually count how many times it's wound and then try to recreate that?
No, I think that's a waste of time. There's more efficient ways of matching it up. A lot of times what I do is I'll take a picture of it and I'll see how much wire was filled on the bobbin and try and match that visually when I'm rewinding it. But also you can weigh it. And this might be giving away a secret to anybody out there that repairs pickups. But if you don't have resistance and you know what kind of wire was used, you just weigh the bobbin before you cut all the wire off. And then when you put the new wire on, you just you weigh it every once in a while and make sure that it's the same amount. Like, that's pretty much the closest you can get.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the bobbin would be like the part that visually would strike out as being like, if you just went full new replacement pickup, that would be what would seem out of place on a vintage guitar, I would think, right?
Yeah, I mean, unless you aged it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. I have a few questions about the Nick was telling me that you're a big Gibson humbucker guy.
Yeah.
And so obviously the PAF is kind of like what people look at. Is that one of your like favorite pickups to?
Yeah, and the PAF is kind of a Pandora's box. And I've met Joe Bonamassa probably over a dozen times, and I like having conversations with him about this, because PAFs are all so different. Like, a PAF pickup for one person is completely different to another person. Like, Seymour Duncan always comes out with these 59 pickups, especially like the Joe Bonamassa ones, but they're all different, and it's because all PAFs are pretty much different. So what they're cloning is like one actual PAF from one actual guitar when they come out with those reissues. So, and what's funny about the whole PAF thing is that in the 50s and 60s, PAFs were just stock. In the 70s, when they're trying to wind hotter and louder humbuckers, they're trying to recreate the tones of the PAFs. Or people will buy a hot pickup with the intention of sounding like a PAF. Or people will want a hot pickup, this period, to sound like a PAF. But not all PAFs were hot. In fact, a lot of them were underwound or almost weak. So if you want that PAF tone, but you also want a hot pickup, that's almost an oxymoron. So a lot of people will shop for pickups by looking at the resistance. But the resistance doesn't tell you what the tone is. All that the resistance tells you is how much wire's on it. So an 8K of 43 AUG wire, which is thinner than the normal 42, is about 8,000 winds of wire. To hit 8K with 42 AUG, you need probably at least 10,000 winds of 42 AUG. Now, if they're both the same resistance, do you think that they're the same loudness and tone?
No, I wouldn't imagine it. No.
No idea.
Yeah, well, I can tell you that they're not, because there's more mass and more wire of 42 to get that higher resistance. So it's almost like the difference of, drinking a shake through a coffee straw or drinking a shake through like a normal McDonald's straw or something. It's a lot easier. There's less resistance on thicker wire to get that shaken into your mouth.
Interesting.
So the thicker wire is going to have less resistance, but it's going to be louder. But then there's also a little bit of tone. There's some tone assumptions you can make between different sizes of wire as well. But for me, all that the resistance really tells me is how much wire is on a pickup. It doesn't tell me anything about tone. The other thing that really scratched my head when I was researching pickups is that everybody looks at resistance when shopping for pickups, but a pickup by definition is an inductor. Inductance is measured by henries. Why aren't pickups measured in henries? Henries takes into account wire and the magnet, and it gives you a reading based on inductance. The higher the henries, the more inductance, the louder the pickup. Nobody, I think there's a couple out there that gives a resistance reading and a henries reading, but it's astounding to me why henries is kind of the forgotten measurement of guitar pickups.
That's interesting. I wonder if it's got to do with like equipment to measure that, if that's not a common measurement.
There's a slightly more expensive voltmeter. So okay. I measure a lot of my pickups now are measured in henries, and I put it on my write-ups just for my own for my own records. So I can start keeping like a working history of what I've wound and what they measure in henries.
That's what always cracked me up about the Eddie Van Halen thing, Nick. We forever, whenever like in the 80s, you wanted like an Eddie Van Halen guitar. And even today, people will sell like an Eddie Van Halen, like all the Chinese knockoff companies will sell an Eddie Van Halen pickup. And it's like a 15K, like super hot ceramic humbucker. And Eddie Van Halen, when they finally broke down that Frankenstein Strat, they found out that path he was using was like 4K or something like that, like super low, barely any output, and that he was just driving that Marshall a certain way. And it kind of changed everybody's like view of it. And the ground sound, right?
Yeah, like Les Paul himself liked very, very low K, low resistance pickups, because the lower the resistance, the more frequency response you have. So the hotter you make a pickup, the more muddy it's going to sound, and the less high end you're going to have on it. So, but with hot pickups, for example, like the super distortions and stuff, or even Eddie Van Halen, if you're just looking to plug an amp into a guitar without any pedals and you want to drive it hard, a hotter pickup is what you want. But if you play clean, or if you're going to drive your pickups with pedals, you don't need a super hot pickup. But then again, it's all based on taste. It's all what you think is best. Everybody's chasing their own dragon on that.
Yep. Gotcha. I was going to ask you something too, Nick. I think we can kind of segue into this. Now, when you and I were working on my Strat pickups, we went like round and round on the different magnet, and like you were kicking out like. And then the other day when we were talking about a humbucker for my Samick, we were talking about how. I think you were saying how an El Nico 2 or an Elco 3 had like a mid push, and an El Nico 4 was very transparent. And if you like the way your guitar sounds unplugged, that an El Nico 4 might be a good option, because it'll just it's the most transparent you can get. Can you kind of go through the different El Nico magnets and kind of their characteristics?
Sure. And I'll like preface this by saying that there's a lot of voodoo around. If it's enamel coated wire, or if it's poly coated wire, if it's an Alnico pickup or a ceramic pickup, there's a lot of beliefs around this. And, when you buy magnets from a magnet supplier, or if you even do any kind of research on the internet, it's going to tell you what the descriptions are of these different magnets. So what I'm doing is kind of repeating from the research that I've done. I can say with my own ear, and maybe it's tone fatigue or whatever, but the differences between these magnets are very, very subtle. But you can legitimize the existence of each one of these magnets based on what your goal is. So, ironically, Alnico 3 is the weakest. you'd think that Alnico 2 is the weakest because it's a lower number, but
That's
for
what
some
I always
reason
thought.
it's not true. So Alnico 3 is the weakest. A lot of people like it because it's very it has an emphasis on the high end. And since it's weak, if you're doing like an underwound humbucker, and this is you're going for that aged 50s PAF kind of sound, you want it to actually sound like it's an old pickup. You know, an Alnico 3 is a good choice. It's a little bit shrill in the bridge position. It can make a nice neck pickup, but for like my Kiss tribute band, it's a PAF underwound with an Alnico 3 in it. I drive it. We can talk about that later, but I drive it with distortion. It sounds great. The Alnico 2 is got like a little bit of a mid-range hump to it. So if you want to hump in your mid-range, you can use an Alnico 2. Now, when I was first winding pickups, like I kind of come from like a little bit of a Harley background, and I know that if you put like a high fire ignition, you got to put like a performance cam in there. You know, if you're gonna put like a high performance carburetor in it, you have to have the better air filter. Like you can't just do one thing. So if you're gonna make a hot pickup, I was under the impression that you'd have to put a ceramic magnet in it, or an Alnico 8, which is the strongest, before you get to ceramic, or at least an Alnico 5 to drive all that resistance. But that's not true. So like some of these assumptions I was able to break fairly easily. If you look at the like the Eddie Van Halen type of humbucker, or even like the Slash humbucker, it's an Alnico 2 Seymour Duncan. Those are fairly high resistance, like between 10 and 14K. And an Alnico 2, you know, runs with them just fine. So, but the basic premise of matching a magnet with the pickup you're winding is that an Alnico 5 has high bass and high highs. It doesn't have the mid-range that an Alnico 2 has. When you wind a hotter pickup, you're losing that range of EQ on the high end. So you compensate that with the magnet. So you get some of that high end back by having a like an Alnico 5 or even a ceramic magnet.
So is that why an Alnico 5, when you buy like, you know, your basic import pickups or whatever, like the industry standard stock pickup or whatever for like a Strat is always an Alnico 5 magnet? Like all the time.
Yeah, because Chinese guitars, and this is I'm going to paint with very broad strokes here. Chinese guitars have a bunch of poly finish on them. They're made with less than optimal wood, and when you play them acoustically, they're a little bit muddy in sound. So you would want a brighter pickup to compensate for that sound. Which brings me to Alnico 4. Nick was asking me about this. If you have a guitar that sounds awesome acoustically, and like it could be a Les Paul or a Strat or whatever, if it sounds like the Bells of Ireland every time you play it when it's not plugged in, but when you plug it in, it sounds a little weird, maybe you want Alnico 4 magnets in it, because Alnico 4s, by reputation, have a very flat EQ. And like to quote the legendary producer Tom Dowd, he's done Layla for Eric Clapton and done Aretha Franklin. He said his popular saying is, what's the best way to record Aretha Franklin? You put a microphone in front of her. So what we learned from that is when you have a guitar that sounds awesome, not plugged in, you want a pickup that sounds as transparent as possible. You don't want to color the tone. So to do that, you don't make a pickup that's too hot, and you put a magnet in it that's generally flat EQ. You plug it in, you adjust your amp to taste, and run for the hills.
That is fascinating. Like I didn't even know they made an Alnico 8. Like I've never heard of like that at all. And I always wondered, like it was either whenever you got like a Johnson Strat or like a Squire or whatever, it was either, or if you got some kind of a Epiphone, like a cheaper Epiphone. I mean, on the Epiphone side of things, you know, it was always a hot ceramic humbucker. And then for like an import. And then if you got a Squire or a Strat, it was always an Alnico 5 or a ceramic set. Like my dad's had these Dragonfire pickups before in his guitars, like, and I've used GFS and things of that nature. And like they're usually the cheaper sets are usually the OEMs are usually like a ceramic or an Alnico 5, depending on what you're going for. And that would make sense why everybody with a cheap guitar is like, yeah, you can get these, you know, imported pickups or whatever. And, you know, I got them overwound for the Texas sound or whatever. And they're usually just, all they did was get a high output pickup to make up for the cheap wood and a ton of finish on their guitar. That's interesting. But
Yeah.
man.
Well,
That's
I've got a couple questions along that line. Well, one, I want to jump back to something here in a minute, but you in discussion you had told us that you make a lot of pickups for a company called Woodward Guitars. Is that something in the approach where you're making, like, okay, I know that the guitar acoustically sounds this way, I'm gonna pop this kind of pickup in this one with this kind of magnet? Is that something you were thinking about?
Well, with Woodward guitars, it kind of starts with the wood of the body, and I've had the pleasure of talking to Kurt Navarre about this. Kurt's the head of that company, and he basically shops at all these reclaimed wood sheds, and he looks for old pine, like pine that was taken out of like an apartment in Detroit that was built in the 1910s. So you got to think to yourself, that wood was probably alive in the 1800s.
Yeah.
So Kurt makes a one-piece pine body, and that's totally early 50s Fender recipe Telecasters. And they're super legit, and he says, Nick, I need like a 50s wind Telecaster set for this setup. Or he'll get a customer that wants Filtertrons for his Tele, so he makes a custom guitar for somebody. I'd wind him some Filtertrons. But sometimes I'll just send them like, hey, I've been winding these, like, here's a mini humbucker that would be really cool in a neck. So, maybe you want to route out a Telecaster that's got a mini humbucker in the neck. And he's like, oh yeah, okay, cool. So he's kind of creating things off of me, and I'm creating things off of him. And he gets a lot of custom orders where they don't want my pickups because obviously they never heard of me. I'm a no-namer or whatever. Maybe they're turned on to EMGs, or maybe they're turned on to some other pickup, then they got their heart set on that, which is fine with me. But it is cool to be part of, these guitars are made in Detroit. It's old wood, super old wood. And people wonder why the 50s guitars sound so good. Well, maybe they've dried out. Maybe that wood is cured. There's less, moisture in them. Or maybe the air and the wood was different back then. So you're getting wood from the 1800s in a brand new guitar with very little finish on it, with the 50s recipe of guitar pickups in it. It's almost like you're getting a vintage guitar that's brand new. I just think that concept's really cool. Unfortunately, Woodward Guitars gets confused a lot with this other brand called Wallace Guitars. And if you look up Wallace Guitars, they're a reclaimed Detroit wood company. But what they do is they cut the wood into like squares, and then they glue all the squares together, and they make a body out of that. And the grain's not even facing the right way. I don't like to throw shade on companies because, for one, I've never played them or whatever. But if you compare the Wallace guitars made from Detroit to the Woodward guitars, I think that you'll see an obvious difference.
Well, these Woodward guitars look incredible. Like,
yeah, they're super high end. I mean, I can't say enough good things about them.
Do you actually do you own one, Nick?
Yeah, and that's kind of another thing. Like with guitar builders and pickup winders and stuff, it's almost better to trade services than trade with money. So
I hear a lot about that stuff. Yeah,
I had something he needed. He had something I wanted, and like you said, I'm a Gibson guy. I'm not a huge Fender guy. So if I can get a guitar made to my specs, that's really cool. Like he even did the Strat tummy route and the forearm route, like you'd see in a Strat. That's on my Telecaster, so it's a comfort cut.
You're gonna have to post a pic of that, dude.
Well, I have a question. I can't not unturn this stone. When you mentioned Joe Bonamassa and having the chance to talk to him about pickups, it made me wonder what it maybe, if you're free to say, what Joe's opinion on the perfect PAF pickup.
Well, I've been seeing and talking to Joe since around 2004, and his tastes have obviously gone up since his bar days. He's obviously selling out theaters now, and it's a little bit more of a pain to get on the meet and greet list, even though you've been seeing him for so long. But when he does talk candidly about it, he likes the vintage recipe, but at the same time, he says there's as many crap PAFs from like 59 or even like the 59 Les Pauls. There's as many bad ones as there are good ones.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you see one for sale, you kind of scratch your head a little bit like, why is this for sale? Because if it was super awesome, people hold on to those things. They're like, everybody knows they're the holy grail of guitars. So either they need the money or it's just not that great of a player. So he's played a lot more 59s than he's owned, but he's owned a lot of the good ones. And what I think he's found is that the 59s and 60s that he owns, all of them are so different. They all have like such a different personality. So the first 59s that he came out with Seymour Duncan were clones, I think, of his Principal Skinner 59. And if I remember correctly, the genetic makeup of the Seymour Duncans, when you consider the resistance and the wire and the magnet that he used, aren't identical in composure to the actual Principal Skinner guitar, but the tone is there. So he was basically getting prototypes in Seymour Duncan, and he was mixing and matching the neck and the bridges until he found a combination that he thought was an accurate representation of the tone of Principal Skinner, and he said, that's it, run with that. And they made 1,959 of them. So I think that his ear is probably a little bit more keen than most when it comes to the tone, but it's also really interesting that in the year 2017, what we make to match that tone is not the same as what he had in 1959 for whatever reason.
Interesting.
Well, I have a question. With the 50s wind telly, what makes a 50s wind telly a 50s wind pickup? That's kind of interesting to me. What makes it different than a modern telly pickup?
There's really not too much. You look at the direction that the wire was wound. You look at the kind of wire that was used, whether it's poly or enamel. You take a look at what kind of resistance it was, and also just some of the things that Fender did back in the day before the 60s and then the 70s came along. Whenever they retooled or whenever they had like a different era, whether it was who owned the company or who they had working for them, the techniques to make the pickups are a little bit different. So, for example, everybody likes to wax pot guitars. In the 50s, guitars weren't potted. If you found a 50s guitar that had wax potting in it, it wasn't from the factory like that. Maybe it was feeding back, or maybe it was microphonic, and they brought it to some guitar tech and they dipped it in wax to keep it from feeding back or howling. So that was almost a troubleshooting measure by guitar techs when the pickup worked, but it just didn't sound right. So looking at that from the 50s, like the old Fender factory, from what I heard, they used to dip their pickups in like polyurethane. So instead of dipping it in hot wax, they would just, dunk it in that until the bubbles stopped coming out, and then it would dry very hard. So it would protect the bobbin, protect the windings, and that's not something that guitar companies do. Companies these days, they just do wax potting. So when I talk about the vintage Fender recipe, it also involves potting in something other than wax, like a poly sealer or something like that. And you can hear a little bit of a difference between a wax potted guitar and a poly potted guitar. For me, with the windings, like on a bridge pickup on a telly, it's wound in string, and the old string was black, and you can't find black string. So whenever you see new Telecaster pickups that are wrapped in string, they're always wrapped with white string. So what I do is I'll pot the pickup in poly, and I'll wrap the string around it while the poly's still wet, and that'll make the string stick to the bobbin better so that the string doesn't fall off. After that, to make it look like it's black, I take a black conductive paint, which also helps ground the pickup, and I paint the black conductive paint around the yarn to make the yarn look like it's black. So it's a new technique to get it to be the old recipe, but I still think it's faithful to the way that they used to do things.
That is super interesting, man. And I know that you dipped mine in urethane, my Strat pickups, and we can talk about that a little bit more on the Mojo Minute and the process I went through with you to get mine done. But I think we need to ask you a little bit about your band, man. We need to talk about your Kiss Trip band here and how that got started and what you play in that and whatnot.
Yeah, it's when I moved to Michigan, I found a job here and I was one of the only males working there. So my only friend was my guitar luthier, and John Dagis of Dagis Guitars in Livonia. I would just drop off guitars at his place and hang out with him, and we would talk about when we were kids and stuff. And I was like, yeah, man, when I was in kindergarten, they said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said Ace Frehley from Kiss, and nobody knew what that meant. But we shared this love for Kiss very early on, and the next thing I knew, he had a tribute band for Kiss, and as soon as they had an opening, I just jumped to it, and they needed a guy to do the Star Child Paul Stanley character. And I knew it backwards and front since I was 13. So, it was really cool to just jump right in and start gigging with them. So it was a little weird at first. I mean, the wife, looked at me like, you're going to wear 7-inch heels and put makeup on your face. And I usually wear a beard, so I have to shave my beard off every time there's a gig. I mean, there's some sacrifice with it. But one thing that I never really understood was that, to have a rock show, especially a Kiss show, it has to look big. And a half stack, as most of you know, like let's say you got a 50-watt half stack, like a Marshall half stack, it's too big of an amp to play in a bar. It's almost too big of an amp to play at an outdoor festival. So how can you have stacks and stacks and stacks of Marshalls? You're blowing like thousands of dollars on all that, and you can't even plug it in. Yeah. So I went up to my dad's cabin in Wisconsin. He builds birdhouses and stuff, and has all the table saws and stuff. I got the measurements of what Marshall cabinets look like, and we made some collapsible, empty Marshall cabinets. So there's like 4 full stacks. And then I got the dimensions of what a head is, and I made my own fake heads with the real Marshall plate on the front, real Marshall knobs. You can plug them in. You can, turn the little pilot light on, and but there's no guts on the inside. There's no tubes. There's no wires. But it all looks legit. So now we have a wall of Marshalls, and we can play a real Kiss show, look like a real Kiss show without needing any of those huge amps.
Dude, that is awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Now you said there was a way you do that, right? You're using like 3D printing or something.
Yeah, you tend to go shopping for like the piping, like the little white piping that outlines all the nice Marshall cabinets.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody can tell a valve state, cabinet because there's no white piping around the middle.
Right.
It's like $1 a foot. So that would have been way too expensive. So what I did was I went to the Home Depot, got some wooden dowels, painted them white, and just glued them in. I used regular like speaker cloth, but there's no holes in the cabinet, so I just painted the backing black and stretched the speaker cloth. But the logos, the 11-inch Marshall logos, those are like $20. So you need 12 of them. That's pretty expensive. So you 3D scan it and you start running off Marshall logos, 3D print it. So yeah, a lot of it was just do-it-yourself stuff, but a lot of it was also made with Marshall replacement parts.
So what about the costume, man? Because you really do pull off Paul, man. Like you.
Oh, thanks.
I've seen a couple pictures and I was like, oh, they must have been at a Kiss. That's Nick.
Yeah. Well, when you start out, there's like Halloween costume shops all over online, and you can buy Kiss licensed costumes, and the costumes are one size fits all. And they're not very flattering if you have even a decent body, because they're meant to fit people of all sizes. Even the boots, the boots were like generic ranges of sizes. So like the large was like sizes 9 to 12. And I've got like a size 11, and they were still way too big. Like you had to roll an ankle wearing these things. So what I ended up having to do for these boots was I'd put on like the football ankle braces lace them up really nice and tight and take up all the room I could. And I'm stuffing foam in them because these platforms are super hard to walk in. You forget how to play guitar when you're in these things. Like it literally takes practice to remember how to play anything with these boots on. And I played with those boots for maybe a half a year before I found somebody that would make me custom boots. And custom boots are like $400, but totally worth it. And then with the KISS licensed costumes, they wear out, they break, or they just don't fit right. There's a whole nother separate underground of makers of KISS costumes. So there's a gentleman named David McBrayer who's, I think, out of Nashville, and he makes historically accurate KISS costumes. He's the best around. He makes stuff for like Motley Crue tribute bands and like Queen tribute bands. He does everything. But if you tell him, I want a Paul Stanley outfit from 1975 from the Alive tour, he'll say, okay, cool. So you want the feather shoulders and the feather sleeves and, you know, what's your height and weight? And, you know, he asks you for all the dimensions. You come up with a price and he mails it to you. It's really cool. Or if you want a Gene Simmons costume with the bat wings, or if you want the spiked shoulder pads, or if you want like your own mix or whatever of genres, he can do whatever you want. So it's a really cool kind of hobby. And what's also nice about being in a KISS tribute band as opposed to like just a cover band or a band that does all original music is that it makes money and it doesn't need to be very heavily advertised. When people say a KISS tribute's going to be somewhere, there's a set of KISS fans in that area, and you're going to pull about at least 100 of them because they know what they're going to get. They know what they're in for.
That's awesome, man. Real quick, can you, before we go to picks, can you what guitar and what amp do you play the most when you're playing a KISS show?
I don't play an Iceman. I think that I just never found one that I really liked, but I do play a cracked mirror finish Washburn, which was the Paul Stanley endorsed guitar when he was doing the farewell tour in 2000. And I always had a soft spot for a Flying V, so I got a black Gibson Flying V. It's the 120th anniversary, and the only reason, 120th anniversary Gibsons get a bad rap, but the Flying V in particular has white binding on the fretboard, and when you're playing a gig in low light situations, you need white binding on that fretboard, otherwise you're not going to see the dots. So I for some reason I gravitate towards that Flying V quite a bit, and I put that either through a Sansamp fly rig, the Plexi version. Sounds really good. You plug it straight into the PA. You know, KISS wasn't known for its awesome tone anyway, so you get a good Marshall sound out of that, and you go straight ahead. Or Tommy Thayer plays Hughes and Kettner now, so I have a Hughes and Kettner Deluxe 20, and I play through that now for the most part, and that has an XLR on the back where I can go straight into the PA from the back of that tube head.
Oh, that sounds awesome, man. A little more complicated than I thought you were gonna say. I thought you were going to just say, yeah, I just plug straight into a Marshall JCM, whatever.
Yeah, that's what I was totally expecting. Like maybe like a small Marshall or like a Black Star or something like that was voiced like a Marshall. But that's interesting. I like that.
This is simpler than that. The Sansamp fly rig, if you look it up, it's a pedal with 4 buttons on it. You plug your guitar into it. The other side goes right into a PA.
That's awesome.
Or if I'm using the Hughes and Kettner head, I might have like a 112 cabinet there to put it through, but you just plug straight into that. And then there's a red box, if you're familiar with the Hughes and Kettner DI. They've got a red box DI box, and that's installed right in the back of the head. So you plug that in, and it goes straight to the amp. To the PA. It simulates like a 412 cab.
Oh, okay. So you don't, and I think you mentioned this to me before, but you're not much of a pedal guy, right?
No, I got the wireless. I got a tuner. This is kind of a crutch, but vocally I have a voice tone G or whatever, the TC Electronics, and you plug your guitar into that, and whatever chord you play, it'll actually tune a little bit your voice to the chord you're playing. It's like a very, very minimal slight pitch correction. So if I lose my voice halfway through a show, it's not going to sound terrible to the audience. But for doing like acoustic open mics and stuff like that too, it's really good for plugging like an acoustic in playing and singing through, because it just kind of keeps you on pitch.
Huh. I would imagine it's hard to hit pedals with your big old platforms on too, right?
Yeah, and Kiss didn't do pedals. I mean, they rolled off on their volume to get less gain, and they rolled up to get more gain. And Joe Bonamassa is another guy that does that too. I mean, you just put your tone on 5 and your volume on 5. You adjust the amp to taste, and then if you want more juice, you just roll up on the tone or the volume.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of the reasons why most of my pedals just stay on, is I just get totally. I don't know how I'd be able to do that, especially if I was performing. But my last question before we roll into the Mojo Minute and talk a little bit about my Hondo. Do you do any pyrotechnics in these shows?
Officially or unofficially?
We don't want any white snake incidences.
Yeah, we have what I'll just say is like the equivalent of like a smoke bomb that you'd buy over the counter. Right away, usually our first song of the show will have a little bit of a poof of black smoke. So we do that. We have confetti cannons that go off at the end of the night, like during Rock and Roll All Night. We've got some confetti cannons.
Oh, cool.
And then our ace character has a smoking guitar for his solo, so that kind of counts as something. We've got a huge LED Kiss sign that I made out of LEDs. There's probably 300 LEDs on it, and I've got that programmed with an Arduino chip, so I can control the blinking patterns with a remote control. I mean, all the major aspects of a Kiss show you're going to get with this, like the spitting of the blood. He blows fire. The Gene Simmons character blows fire. So the only thing that we haven't quite figured out yet, and we're getting kind of close, is making like a scissor lift for the drum set, so that the drum set can rise up in the air. The problem is that most of the venues we play don't have a tall enough ceiling anyway.
You just put you right through the top of the ceiling.
Yeah, the cymbals are getting crushed by the ceiling.
Dude, this is honestly the most interesting thing ever. Like, man, you're not playing around. You guys get out there and like you're doing it. How many shows do you play, you think?
We do like one a month, and whenever we play somewhere, it's an entire day ordeal. I mean, the 2 hours that we're on stage is like the quickest part of it, but you have to go in, load in, set up the cabinet, set up the stage, make sure it's all good, and then getting in the makeup takes an hour. You'd think, how hard is it to put a black star on your face? But you can mess up a star pretty easy. It just takes a long time.
Do you sing in that band or no?
Yeah, I sing all the Paul Stanley songs.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah, so
dude, that's not anything to joke around about, man. That guy was like on Broadway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I sound like him at all, but I've got the inflections right, and I know the transitions. I mean, I've been watching him since I was a kid, so I know how to play the character. But when I get off stage, you're like, dude, you sound just like Paul Stanley. I'm like, oh, thanks, man. Like, I don't think I do, but
well, he's really short too, isn't he? And you're like 6'2".
Yeah, I'm about 6 foot. I'm not sure how tall Paul Stanley is, but I think he's about 6 foot, 6'1".
Is he really? I always thought he was a short New York guy, like not very big at all. But,
no, Peter Criss I think was the short one, but yeah, it's like
my Kiss trivia, I guess.
I never thought of myself as being a star child in a Kiss tribute band. I always wanted to be the ace, but it's what they needed, and I wanted to be in the band hard enough, and I know it backwards and front, so when it comes to that, it was a pretty easy role for me to fall into. But one of the things, like when you're not singing, like when like the demon is, the Gene Simmons character is doing his part, you can't just stand there and play. It's not like you're in a cover band where you're just standing there and playing your part. You have to be moving. You have to be engaging the audience. You have to make eye contact with somebody. You have to point at somebody or throw your guitar in the air, go down on a knee, or sway back and forth in sync. There's a ton of choreography with this stuff that, it's almost like aerobics, man, in these huge platform heels. It's just very taxing on your body. Like the next day, it feels like you've been through a football game.
Well, it's really, I kind of feel like segueing into the Mojo Minute and talking about a beater Strat with some pickups in it is not going to be it's not going to compare at all to what we just discussed. But on that note, It's time for the Mojo Minute. And we are going to talk about my Hondo Strat copy, which it's got a cool story, and it's got Nic's pickups in it, but it didn't start out that way. As many of you who've listened to the show know, I basically got rid of all my stuff when I had kids. I didn't have really any guitars or amps or anything like that, and I think I had my resonator. That was about it. And my dad, I had a nice blacky looking, actually it was a Dave Gilmore looking Strat, and it was black guard, maple neck, black body. It had some nice pups in it. It was a Mexican made, and it was a really nice guitar. I sold that to my cousin, and I didn't have an electric guitar. So my Uncle Mike's always buying and trading stuff, and my dad went over to his house, and he had this black Strat in his garage. It was all dusty, and it was just laying there, and he's like, hey, you can have that guitar, and I don't need it anymore. Maybe you'll get some use out of it. And my dad brought it home, and it kind of sat in the basement. He cleaned it up and everything, and he said, hey, your Uncle Mike's got this guitar or whatever. And then after a while, he got a couple more guitars, and we kind of segued back into playing again, and he just showed up one day and gave me that guitar. He's like, hey, you can have that. You don't have an electric guitar right now. And so I cleaned it up, and I put some pickups in it. I put some GFS gray bottoms in it. I was familiar with that pickup, and it's actually a 1984 Hondo Fame. And from what I've heard on them, they're pretty. I mean, they're a solid wood guitar. They're and the finish really isn't all that thick. It was Japanese made. The finish wasn't all that, or Korean made. It wasn't all that thick, and like it's got natural relicking all over it, and it doesn't take long to get through to the finish. But I really didn't like how it sounded, and I changed all the electronics, and I kind of screwed all those up, and I had like popcorn pickups, and I was like, I didn't like the GFSs, so I was trying another pickup in the bridge, and then I tried a rail humbucker, then I did this, and I just didn't like it. So when I saw Nic's post on 60 Cycle Hum and we started talking, I was like, I got to have this guy make me some pickups, and his cost was super reasonable. So we started talking about it, and I told him exactly what I wanted. I just ordered this new wiring harness, so I was going to rewire the whole guitar, and we got to talking about I wanted a low output set of pickups, but I wanted a slightly hotter bridge pickup with that was really bright and really cranged. I mean, I really want that. I wanted that almost Rickenbacker type sound, or a Telly like sound. I wanted a really bright bridge pickup because I'd be playing off that the most. And so I think, Nic, what did I end up going with? You made me a set, and I ended up going with, I think, El Nico 3s, was it?
Yeah, it's like a 1954 kind of set. Not quite like an Eric Johnson, but a little bit more modified of a early 50s Fender, like single coil, with, like you said, the hotter bridge, but also a bridge plate under the bridge, kind of like what you'd see underneath a Telecaster bridge pickup.
Yeah, and we talked about, and I'm not sure what got us into that whole bass plate conversation. Do you remember? I think it was, I told you I had Telly pickups that I really liked, and you said, well, I can put a bridge plate on there for you. And what does a bridge plate actually do? I mean, does it add twang?
Well, it changes the magnetic field. So if you think of the magnetic field as a halo, the poles from the North Pole to the South Pole make a halo effect all the way around the pole. When you put a base plate under the bobbin, the magnet on the bottom of the bobbin will shift the magnetism through the base plate to change the halo shape of the magnet, and it makes the range of that magnet a little bit bigger, and it resembles closely the tone of a Telecaster pickup. Now, a lot of the people will say that adding a base plate takes a little bit of the high end off, which is true, but it does help make it a more full sounding pickup. But it also increases the Henrys, and nobody looks at the inductance part of it, but it does increase the inductance by adding that metal base plate. The original, if you look at the patent for Fender's single coil pickups in a Stratocaster, I believe, and I could be wrong in this, but I believe that all three positions had metal base plates on them. But when they went to production, they just had fiber bobbins without the base plates to save on the costs.
Oh, interesting. And I really like that bass plate. It's got, and like you were saying, it's got a really round high end. It's not like some scrap
It's
pickups
not shrill.
Yeah, exactly. Like some Tele pickups I had that were just like an El Nico 5 Tele pickup or a ceramic or whatever. Like they were like ear piercing highs. Like this, I can kick a treble boost on or whatever I've got, or I run through a Pelican Noiseworks 5050, and it never sounds shrill, and it's got that, and I can do that rockabilly surf thing I really like with it, and it sounds perfect. And then the neck pickup's nice and fat. And I was telling you when I first had you make the pickups, like I wanted a pickup that was really, it not exactly bright on the neck, but I wanted it to be defined. And that's what really this has. Like it's good in every position now. And it's funny because I have like $200 worth of electronics in this like $80 guitar. But I mean, the body's good and the neck is fat and the frets are fat. And I got to change the tuners at some point. There's some old ropes on there, but they're kind of like one of the backs fell off of one and they're kind of loose. And I got to change that. But other than that, the guitar's a road warrior, man. I mean, it looks cool. It's got the look. The only thing I need on it now is I think I want to get like a cool brushed aluminum guard on it or something cool. Like I want to add, like Strats look so boring sometimes, and I don't want to go the pearloid route or tortoise route with it. I want to do something different. So I think I'm gonna do that. But yeah, and you coated those in urethane and all that, right?
Yeah. And it was important for me when we talked that you knew the personality of the guitar that you were putting pickups in, and you knew what it sounded like, and you knew what you wanted it to sound like. You knew what you wanted to get out of it. And when you make a custom pickup for somebody, you're not making it like every single other pickup you've ever made. You're making it for that person, for that one guitar. So it's important for me to know the personality that you want, or if you're fighting something like, oh man, this guitar is too muddy, I need something a lot brighter. Like it's important when you're making a custom pickup to know those attributes.
Yep, and that's why we're already talking about a set of humbuckers or a humbucker. I haven't decided yet to go in my Samick because I find myself only playing off the bridge pickup in that guitar, and I think I want to, after talking to you, I think I want to go with the El Nico 3 to get that little mid boost and go that route. But I'm looking forward to getting one of your humbuckers, man. So what is your website for your pickups? And did you want to just quickly mention like what you end up charging, or is that like a personal thing that you kind of just go by what you're doing for each person?
No, I mean, especially anybody listening to this podcast, if you mention that you heard this interview in the podcast, usually what I do is I don't charge much more over cost. Sometimes I just charge maybe $20 over what it'll cost me to just make the pickups, because I enjoy making them if you enjoy playing them. And if you don't like it, you can send it back. I can go back to the drawing board, or I can give you a refund. It doesn't pay for us to have pickups out there that you don't like. So the website is greatlakesguitarpickups.com. Super easy to find. If you Google custom guitar pickups Michigan, I come up. Great Lakes Guitar Pickups comes up. But I mean, basically, if you're a musician, you don't have a lot of money, but you want good pickups, you don't have to get it you don't have to pay $300 for an awesome set of pickups. I can make you some, and if you don't like them, I can make you something else. The only customer that ever didn't like what I made them was my first year winding. I was holding the wire with my fingers, and I wasn't holding the wire tight enough, and I couldn't get enough wire on the bobbin to get it hot enough for him. He wanted like an 8K humbucker, and I was holding the wire too loose. It was just going on too loose. So that was the only lesson learned that ever affected a customer. But I've been doing this for almost 8 years now, and I love the research part of it. So if you want somebody that's in it for the love of the actual build of it and the personality of the guitar you're trying to improve, you can't lose with going with me.
Nice, man. Well, I hope people that hear this, want to give your pickups, want to give them a shot. And maybe how about they just drop whirlybirds on you in a message or whatever, and that way you'll know. Sound good?
Yeah, definitely.
All right, cool. Well, I mean, Nick, I can't thank you enough, man. And Clifton and Josh, I'm sorry we talked so much and you guys didn't.
Well, I sounded like a robot half the time anyway, so probably.
Oh, you sound like yourself now. Yes.
Josh
Yeah, I
he's
switched
not
everything.
Batman anymore.
My sound driver crash is what happened. So, but
So if you guys rewind it and listen to Josh talk, you guys can hear him actually, like, he sounds like his voice is being disguised, like he's was in the mafia and got out and
And
now
witness
they're-
protection.
Well, they don't call me Agent K for nothing.
But
Nice.
yeah, man, Nick, this has been great and super informative for our listeners, and I don't think they'll look at pickups the same way again, man. So
Yeah, thanks for having me. I could talk about this stuff days.
yeah. And if you get into something else at some point or try some new products or something, be sure to come back on the show and talk, man.
Sure. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, for coming on the Whirly Birds. And I just want to make a quick mention. If you enjoy this episode, maybe Nick and you've heard this episode, go click and subscribe to us. We're on iTunes and Podbean and YouTube. You can find us all of those places. And so the Clifton Whirly Show, and just would really appreciate that subscribe if you like what you've heard. And thank you again, Nick, for coming on the show. It was a pleasure and a lot of useful information, and I enjoyed hearing about your cover band too, and all the work that takes into that. So appreciate it very much.
Thanks.
All right, guys. Well, join in next week and for another episode of the Whirly Birds, and y'all have a good day.